The movie begins with an elderly woman telling a story to her granddaughter. She says that many years ago there was a woman who lived in a city and worked as a product seller, going door to door. One day, while returning from her work, the seller noticed a large bungalow in the reflection of her car's mirror. Curious, she decided to go see it. When she arrived, she was surprised by the beauty of the place. The garden was lovely with the trees shaped beautifully. The seller entered the bungalow, but she couldn't find anyone inside. The place was empty and deserted. The only things left were huge old machines, suggesting that experiments had been conducted there many years ago. As she explored, she heard a voice from upstairs. She followed the sound, climbed the stairs, and found someone sitting in the shadows. She called out to him and asked him to come forward. The person moved into the light, but the seller was shocked by what she saw. The man was holding several weapons in his hands. Frightened, the lady thought about leaving, but the man called out to her, asking her not to go. She turned around and realized the weapons were not weapons at all. They were his hands. His hands were like scissors. He wasn't a human, he was a robot. The lady was startled but curious, so she asked him his name. He replied, "I'm Edward." He explained that he was a robot made to look like a human, but he wasn't complete. The lady felt sorry for him. She could see that he was also scared and lonely. His hands were covered with scars from the scissors, which made her feel even more pity for him. She didn't want to leave him alone, so she decided to take him with her. Edward was excited to be out of the bungalow for the first time, seeing the world outside. As they drove in the car, he looked around, amazed by everything. When they got to her house, the lady gave him clothes to wear, but he struggled because of his scissors for hands. She helped him, and later, during lunch, she introduced him to her family. She treated him like a normal person, even though he was a robot. She offered him human food, but it was hard for him to eat with his hands. The next day, the lady's husband was outside, cutting trees. Edward, curious, went over and used his scissor hands to shape the trees into a dinosaur. The husband was surprised and impressed. Later, Edward made tree sculptures of the family, cutting the shapes with his scissors. The family was happy to see his artwork. As news spread about the new guest in the lady's house, people in the neighborhood came to visit. They told the lady that they had heard about Edward's talent and they wanted to meet him at dinner. The lady gets busy preparing dinner and Edward decides to help her. Using his scissor hands, he quickly cuts the vegetables. While she's struggling to open the seal on a box with a machine, Edward has a flashback. The scene takes us back to the bungalow where Edward once lived. An old scientist is shown working on machines that can make food automatically. The scientist is seen placing a heart-shaped cookie on a robot's chest. This robot is revealed to be Edward, who was built by the scientist over many years. The scientist worked hard to make Edward more human-like, even giving him human emotions. However, Edward's hands remained as scissors because he was designed to cut things like trees, vegetables, and salad. The scientist was planning to give him human hands soon, but the work was unfinished when Edward left the bungalow. Back in the present, Edward is meeting the neighbors who have come to see the new guest. They're all curious about him and amazed by his scissor hands, but they're friendly and welcoming. That night, the lady's daughter, Kim, returns home after a long trip with her friends. She doesn't know who Edward is, and when she sees him, she's frightened and runs out of the room. Her mother reassures her, explaining that Edward is harmless, and they both go to meet him. The next day, Edward is outside, shaping trees beautifully with his scissor hands. People are impressed, and a dog even approaches him. Edward gives the dog a stylish new haircut. The dog's owner is so happy that soon other neighbors bring their dogs to Edward for haircuts. Edward quickly becomes a local celebrity for his talent. A woman is so impressed with her dog's new look that she asks Edward to cut her hair. He agrees, and soon all the women in the neighborhood want him to cut their hair. Even the seller, who brought Edward to the town, asks him for a haircut. As Edward's fame spreads, people suggest he should open a salon, but he needs money to do that. So the seller takes him to the bank to get a loan. However, the bank denies him because Edward has no income, no ID, and no bank account. Edward doesn't care about money, he only cares about Kim, the seller's daughter, who has become fond of him as well. However, Kim's friend is jealous of their growing bond and comes up with a plan. He convinces Kim to steal her father's van and drive to a secluded place to spend time together. Since only Edward can unlock the van, they ask for his help. Edward agrees to go with them. They break into the house to get the van keys, but as they do, the alarm goes off. The shutters of the room where Edward is kept begin closing automatically. Kim tries to stop her friend from leaving, wanting to help Edward, but he forces her to leave before the police arrive. When the police show up, they arrest Edward, but he doesn't reveal that Kim and her friend were involved. Edward is presented in front of a judge, but the judge decides to let him go, as Edward doesn't understand right from wrong due to his many years of isolation. Afterward, Edward returns home, where Kim thanks him for saving them, but not revealing their identities. Kim admits that they were planning a robbery, and Edward responds that he already knew, but he didn't say anything because Kim asked him for help. As Kim's respect and love for Edward grow, it's Christmas Day, and Edward creates a beautiful ice sculpture for her. While he's working, the ice starts to float in the air, creating a magical scene. Kim enjoys it as she stands beneath it, but Edward doesn't notice her arrival because he's so focused on his work. Suddenly, Kim's friend arrives and calls out loudly. Edward, distracted, accidentally cuts Kim's hand. Kim's mother arrives and bandages her hand, but Kim's friend pushes Edward outside and insults him. Edward, feeling hurt and angry, starts cutting the trees again, but the neighbors are scared after the robbery incident and call the police. Kim, upset with her friend's jealousy, yells at him and breaks up with him. Edward, sitting sadly on the side of the road, finds comfort when a dog with long hair approaches. This calms him and he returns home to find Kim waiting for him. Kim asks Edward for a hug, but Edward refuses, saying his scissor hands could hurt her. Kim, understanding, hugs him anyway. Edward remembers the scientist who had planned to make him fully human by giving him human hands, but the scientist died before completing the task, which is why Edward still has scissor hands. Later, Kim's jealous friend, drunken with his friends, drives dangerously to Kim's house. Edward notices Kim's younger brother outside and rushes to save him from the car, but during the rescue, his scissor hands accidentally injure Kim's brother. The neighbors and Kim's parents arrive and misunderstand the situation, thinking Edward is attacking the boy. Kim's father is also accidentally hurt by Edward's scissor hands. In the chaos, Kim's friend attacks Edward, but in self-defense, Edward injures him. The police arrive and Edward runs away, heading back to the bungalow where he was created, a world of machines and robots. Kim follows him and finds him there, sitting alone and depressed. Kim's friend, now armed with a gun, arrives and shoots at Edward. He wounds Edward, and Kim, trying to protect him, attacks her friend. In the struggle, Edward, in a fit of rage, fatally injures him by stabbing him with his scissor hands, sending him through a window. Kim, heartbroken but resolute, tells Edward she loves him and bids him farewell. As she leaves, she reveals that she too has scissor hands, like Edward. She shares with the group that she and Edward's paths have ended. Years later, the story returns to the present where the elderly woman, now revealed as Kim, is telling this story to her granddaughter. Kim believes that Edward is still alive, as he was made with artificial intelligence that can grow over time. Her granddaughter asks if Kim loved him too and why she didn't go to see him. Kim explains that she wanted Edward to remember her as she was the last time he saw her. She believes Edward is still out there because, just like the first time he appeared, there is snow on the ground. And, as she tells her granddaughter, if Edward were gone, there would be no snow. The film ends with a scene of Edward in the bungalow carving ice sculptures of angels, one of which is a statue of Kim. The ice falls gently into the city just like it did all those years ago on Christmas Day, and the snow continues to fall.